Okay, welcome back everyone to our second session. Um, we are going to be talking about creativity, careers in creativity this session today, and really excited to have you all here for a panel of people that are coming from different backgrounds in terms of their career stage and their sector, ranging from academic to industry, from early career to mid-career. And so today we want to share some kind of general tips about pursuing a career in creativity research. And then after we have our session today, we'll be moving on to the crosstalk session at 2 o'clock, which will be on creativity and humor with Chris Duffy and Ori Amir. So make sure you check that out as well. Okay, so to start us off, I just want to kind of give an overview of the session today, and then I'll introduce our speakers. So as we all know, creativity is a growing field. It's an exciting time to be a creativity researcher. Creativity is kind of making its way more and more into the mainstream. But the career path of a creativity researcher can be unconventional. We still don't have departments of creativity studies, at least not many, or maybe if you're in an arts department. But not so much in the kind of psychology and neuroscience departments, which is kind of relevant for a lot of our members out there. And so today we'll talk about strategies for communicating your work on the academic job market. We'll talk about industry experiences, postdoc considerations, and then we'll wrap up with some tips and other tips and resources if we have time. Okay, so to get us started, I'm just going to go around and introduce our speakers today, our panelists. So we have Nadine Maliaco, who's a talent analytics consultant from Hogan Assessment Systems. We also have Sergio Agnoli, who's an associate professor from the University of Trieste and a senior scientist at the Marconi Institute of Creativity. Welcome, Sergio. And we have also Stacy Shaw, who's an assistant professor of learning science and technology at the Department of Psychological and Cognitive Science at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Thanks for coming, Stacy. And last but not least, we have Hannah Merciel, who's a postdoc at the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics and also a valiant member of our SFNC organizing committee. So she's on double duty today. Okay, so now that I kind of went around the horn, I want to have each of our speakers kind of briefly introduce themselves, share their current role, and one surprising thing that that you all learned from your career path. And so, Hannah, would you mind getting us started?
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher in the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics. So I work with Anjan Chatterjee. You probably saw it in the last awesome panel. So I completed my PhD in May at Penn State with Roger. And for those of you working at home, I'll still be straight up with my responses, so don't worry about that. So one surprising thing about my career path is that I found this real love and joy for communicating creativity research and research about the arts in general to a lot of people who aren't academics. So for a lot of reasons, some of which we heard in the last session, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it, here, the work that we're doing is really impactful for a lot of people, and it's a really exciting time to be in this field. So excited to chat more about it.
Thanks, Hannah. Sergio, would you mind going next?
Yes, sure. And I'm Sergio Agnoli. I'm an associate professor at the University of Trieste, and I'm the director of a new lab. It's the Dynamics of Creativity Lab at the University of Trieste. And if I have to share some strange during my career path, is maybe an insight or something that I understood recently is that my career was not a linear career, in the sense that I'm a cognitive psychologist, but my I had a PhD in developmental psychology. I was interested in process, in the developmental processes, and this was essential to be able to catch the process part of creativity. And I worked outside of academia for almost 10 years to come back in academia and apply my former educational background for creativity. This is my strange or quite original part in career, is that it's totally non-linear, my career.
Thanks, Sergio. Yeah, I think that's important to mention. Sometimes you look at people's CV and you just think that one thing naturally leads to the next, and that's really not how it works a lot of times. Yes, Stacy, would you mind saying a few words about yourself?
Sure. So, hi, everyone. I'm Stacy. I'm an assistant professor of learning sciences and technologies and psychological and cognitive sciences. We didn't want to leave out any words, so I have this big, long spiel. But I'm a psychologist. I got my PhD in psychology at UCLA in 2020. My research focus has always been on the edge of creativity with mathematical cognition, education, that sort of thing. And for me, I think the most surprising thing has been, I always envisioned like if you study creativity, that's your end goal. You're like a creativity researcher. But for me, it's really been like a gateway research field. So a lot of the things I've learned from the researchers of creativity and the skills you need to do creative research or creativity research it lends really well to other things. And so I find myself now kind of pivoting my research focus into more periods of rest and well-being, which comes out of my work with incubation periods and insight moments in mathematics. And I never really thought that I would deviate as much as I have. There's reasons for that. But in general, I always kind of envision like this linear path of like, I'm a math creativity person, but it's really changed a lot. And I'm actually pretty grateful for having a solid foundation of understanding creativity to sort of borrow from for all these different avenues.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. Nadine.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, I'm Nadine Maliakel. I'm a talent analytics consultant with Hogan Assessment Systems. What the heck does that mean? It means I conduct validation studies for our clients and create custom solutions for them that help their selection and development of employees. The company is located in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but our reach is global, and I am currently in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So most of our workforce is actually remote. And surprising in my career path is hard to think about because I'm linear to a fault. If you look at my CV, you say, oh, this person really wanted to do research, teaching, and practice with a psychology PhD. And that's exactly what I get to do now. I got my PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Nebraska at Omaha this past May. But what is surprising actually is I've had 2 full-time jobs in my career. Before I went to grad school with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and now with Hogan Assessment Systems, and both are actually rooted in personality. And so I did not expect that my 2 full-time careers would be founded by personality psychologists. So very exciting stuff.
Cool, thanks, Nadine. Okay, so we can get into the discussion now. I have a few questions prepared just to kind of throw out there and get the conversation started. And just want to say for anyone in the audience, I see that the chat has been going, people introducing themselves. That's great. Feel free to jump in there with any questions, and we'll keep an eye on that for later when we get to the Q&A. Okay, so as I kind of said in the beginning, kind of considerations about being a creativity researcher. Oftentimes there's not a kind of a conventional career path that one can pursue. There's many different options that you could kind of work you could do as a creativity researcher. And so I'll just throw out the question to our panel here. How do you effectively communicate your creativity research to non-creativity researchers? So whether that's in an academic department or in industry settings. So yeah, anyone that maybe like Stacy or Sergio, if you guys want to take this, I think it's kind of like relevant for job talks, like kind of going out there in the market and trying to kind of talk about your work in an accessible way to those that might not even really know that creativity could be a form of science. Sergio, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. How to communicate to other psychologists or psychology researchers. I think that the first point is finding a common ground or a common interest point. The most important part maybe of being a creativity researcher is that creativity is per se a fascinating topic. It's a fascinating topic with a lot of implicit theories, also from other colleagues, like, as you said, that we have not had any methods to explore creativity. We don't have so scientific grounded approaches or paradigms to study creativity. So anyway, the first point is finding a common ground and a common interesting point. Once we find a common interesting starting point, is our role to explain that we have methods. We have solid methods, and as we already said, we are in the golden era of creativity research, fortunately, luckily enough. And new methods are exploding and are new, are good, are solid. And we can transform a fascinating topic into a solid topic. So starting from a common interesting point with other, especially cognitive psychologists or cognitive scientists, it is possible to develop new research questions, and on new research questions, you create communication, collaborations. And it is, as I said, we are lucky because creativity is something that fascinates other researchers, not creativity researchers, but other researchers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. A lot of people find creativity inherently interesting. So you kind of have like an initial hook to say, I study this, like, oh, that's an interesting topic. I didn't, and then from there you can kind of know your audience in a sense and say, what's the kind of entry point here? If it's going to be, you're in a cognitive psychology department, you can talk about creativity and some aspect of cognition, right? So like memory, attention, like you mentioned, you study attention. So you kind of, that's the common language. That's the kind of way, the entry point. You can kind of get on the same page and talk about it. Stacey, do you have anything to share on this from your talk or anything?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having like a creativity flavor to your research, people always think is so interesting, especially like my field's education. And so we have this interesting paradigm where people are like, we love creativity. We want all our students to be creative. And then you give them a real creative person and they're like, what the hell is this? Like, and so there's this weird sort of dichotomy where you have people who love creativity, but also like don't even know where to start to encourage it. And so I think to really communicate value sometimes for people is like starting with a problem. So like in education, the problem is like, how do you like view creativity? How do you capture it? How is it, that we can sort of get measures and see if this is good or bad? And I do a lot of relation to like expertise development. So if you've, dived in the literature, we're all interested in those flexible integrated semantic networks that you see in experts and creative people. So sort of borrowing that is helpful. But what's interesting is I found in my role, at least at a engineering dominated university, is my role has often been, oh, you study creativity. Oh, we're writing this grant. So like you'll be the one to measure creativity. And I'm like, whoa, right? And so like I often am the party crasher. I'm like, we can't, it has to be very intentional. And so I often think that my job for communicating creativity research is to also communicate this is a real field. There are norms, there are practices, there are limitations, and like you really have to think about measurement. And so I find myself often trying to advocate on behalf of the field, for better or worse, that, it's not just like a flavor you can throw on top of like a grant. It should really be purposeful. So I'll stop using the word flavor and I'll let someone else jump in.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think people might think, oh, we'll just throw a creativity task in there and it'll be fine. Like
all the time.
How many trials, like all the nuances you have to think about. Which is good because for us as a field to like be careful about all that stuff, obviously, and to make other people aware that you do the same kind of measurement principles are following creativity as anything else you're trying to measure. And then also another point you raised about kind of doing creativity research on the side or kind of in parallel to something else. So it's very common like to do training, and anyone here is coming, again, probably not from just like a creativity only field, like you're in a cognitive psychology or in any of these other departments. And so it's pretty common to be studying kind of developmental psychology and creativity. So you can kind of work these things in parallel. Yeah, so Nadine, Hannah, anything to share on this? That's okay. If not, we can move on to the next one too.
Yeah, go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think on sort of the industry side of things, one important thing is that people are really into creativity right now. So creativity is, a top 5 skill on the World Economic Forum's list of things that they want from their employees. And so they're trying really hard to measure creativity, or maybe we call it innovation, or, spicy, flexible thinking or whatever. But I think that, people are really grasping for ways to measure creativity right now. And so they discover that there's this whole field of the cognitive neuroscience of creativity, and they're really wowed by it. So we are actually in very high demand, and we're doing very important work, which is a great, selling point if you're trying to advertise yourself on the job market right now.
Excellent point. Yeah, I think, kind of following up from that, like there is a good demand for people who are doing this kind of work and doing it in a careful way. And also I should say, when I'm talking about, we talk about industry and non-academic pathways, we could also be nonprofits too. Like there's many other kind of jobs you could be in that's not just like at a university or at a company. Like there's a whole other nonprofit sector in there as well. Yeah, Nadine, did you want to add to this one too, or?
Yeah, I think just what I'll add, being in industry and having spent, a good decade in the creativity space, it's really important for me to keep it simple when talking to potential customers or clients. So translating what I know and making it simple, digestible, and ensuring that I'm not just being clear about what I'm trying to say, but that they're not going to necessarily take what I say, spin it, and you go, no, that's not what I said. So maybe also being adaptable when the communication inevitably can go awry because someone else on the receiving end kind of puts their spin on it. That's something that I've definitely learned in my time in industry. And then the other thing is, yeah, I mean, a lot of people come to us and we have the same way to go about measuring things. It's through personality. So I get to think a little bit about, okay, in this company's definition of creativity that I need to figure out a solution for, it's not just going to be our scale that maps onto openness to experience. It's not just going to be inquisitive. There's going to be other personality factors to consider in what they're defining creativity as. And so it's been really interesting to look at measurement, yes, but only in this one space, and think about how there's an interaction of various personality factors that go into one company's definition of creativity.
Yeah, that's really, really good points. So I want to shift a little bit now and kind of talk about more specifically the non-academic pathway. We've talked a little about it so far. Some things are relevant to both in industry and academia, but just to kind of think about how working as a creativity researcher might differ in industry and non-academic pathways compared to academia. So anyone on the panel who had any experience, kind of, we've all had experiences as grad students, of course, and what that's like to do, and but yeah, and how the day-to-day life of doing research in a university is different from like any kind of different experience you had outside of university. So anyone who's had any non-academic experiences here, feel free to jump in. Yeah.
If I can add my experience, as I said, I started in academia and then joined a research institute which was outside of academia, which is the Marconi Institute for Creativity, which was born on the initiative of the University of Bologna, but also of an external foundation, the Guglielmo Marconi Foundation. And the big difference is that if you work outside of academia in these research institutes, one of your first priorities is searching fundings, constantly searching fundings. So you need to make research to sustain your searching of findings. There is a different attitude in the to research if you work outside of academia and in academia, at least in a educational system like the Italian educational system. And this is maybe the biggest, the big difference. And the second one is that you do not translate your research results to educational approaches or to the education. You just increase your knowledge, but you are not sharing your knowledge. If you are within academia, you can increase everyone's knowledge, your knowledge, but also you can share knowledge. And this is another big difference.
Yeah.
I could
Great
just,
point. Go ahead.
oh
Stacey.
yeah. So I had another life before grad school where I was an education evaluator. So some similarities. I look over spreadsheets. I do statistics, but I think we're seeing now a movement where there's sort of more overlap between industry and academia than we've ever had. So a lot of people are going into industry, and it's at least my belief that you can do good work anywhere, and that no matter where you go, there's going to be problems with the organization. And it's just sort of like, what can you put up with? And so really for me, the thing I love about being an academic, and again, like that's a super privileged role. Like I'm super lucky I got this position. Not everyone gets that control or that amount of luck, but I have autonomy over what I study. So before it was like, we had funding to do this. We're only looking at test scores. Here, I wake up one day, I'm like, you know what? I really want to study rest periods and like how they help people. And people are like, great. So there's a little bit of difference there, but the hard skills are usually the same, at least in like sort of equivalent roles. So I think like, you know, being able to communicate statistics, even qualitative data analysis, organization, documentation, all of those things are the same. So if people are really thinking like, I want to be versatile, I would definitely recommend to develop those core skills that will serve you in any sort of position.
That's great, Stacey. Yes, it's important to think about how not just how things are different, but how they're similar. And I have heard that before from folks working in industry, that there's a lot of kind of parallels to life as an academic as well, but also some key differences. Yeah, any other thoughts on this one? Okay. All right. Well, yeah, so let's move on to postdoc life. So when looking for a postdoc, there's different considerations that come into play. I think in general considerations, regardless of if you're a creativity researcher, would be, am I going to take this opportunity to try to broaden my expertise and that I feel like is going to make me more well-rounded and maybe competitive for a job market. And so, you know, that's definitely one track. Another track is to kind of really more double down on what you're already strong in, and it kind of to build that out more. But oftentimes it's not necessarily a choice, and you can actually do both. You could kind of continue on in the research path that you've already been developing, and then in parallel kind of pursue some additional training that's going to help to strengthen you as a researcher. And so, yeah, how did people go about, for those who did have postdocs on the panel, when looking for a postdoc position, how did you decide whether to kind of stay mostly in your lane as a creativity researcher, if that was the main thing that you were doing, or to branch out and try to seek these additional kind of like more like adjacent training opportunities?
I guess I, as the postdoc on the panel, just did this and made a lot of these decisions. So in the spring, when I was looking for postdoc positions, I sort of started out setting some goals for what I wanted, and I spent a lot of time thinking about what I want this journey to sort of look like. Um, I ultimately decided that I wanted to be somewhere creativity or creativity adjacent. So I ended up in a neuroaesthetics lab. So definitely creativity adjacent. We talk about a lot of the same issues with more of this art spin, which is something that I'm very interested in and, was open to learning a lot more about. Um, I felt like publishing more in the field of creativity research was probably going to be the best option for my career trajectory. And I mentioned I do a lot of nonprofit consulting work, and a lot of that has been sort of arts and health and workplace based. So I thought that being in this environment would be a good move. So there were a lot of practical considerations in terms of that, but ultimately it came down to wanting to be somewhere where I could refine my method skills, both for me, but also in a way that would be valuable for the lab that I ended up with. So that was definitely a consideration. I brought to the table, I can do network science and fMRI, and ended up in a place where they needed network science and fMRI. Just in, sort of a tweak to what I was doing before. So I would think sort of, where do you want to be in 5 years? And what field is going to get you there? What lab environment is going to get you there? And what day-to-day work is going to get you there? I think is the big question.
Yeah, that's a great point, Hannah. I think also to say, to build on what you're saying, like what kind of skills can you bring to the postdoc position that's going to help you be marketable for positions? And that, I mean, that's kind of like a general strategy or thing when you're pursuing postdocs is kind of oftentimes the positions actually open up in a non-regular way. It's like someone gets a grant, they're like, oh, I need a postdoc to help me with this. And then so they're looking for people with specific skill sets that are kind of related to what they said they were going to do in their grants. I mean, there's other paths that aren't tied to grants. A lot of times they are tied to grants though. And so being able to bring a skill set and like a knowledge base in a field that's relevant to that position. And just, yeah, as a general tip, just keep an eye out for postdocs as they're kind of popping up. It's not like faculty jobs or grad school where you're applying like at a specific time. Like they could come up at really any time. Yeah, so anyone else on the panel that had a postdoc experience they'd like to share? Stacey, did you have a postdoc?
Wait,
No?
you did.
Did I? Yes, I did. Yeah.
You want to talk about it?
I'm not okay. All right. So yeah, I'll tell me go back in history now. So I got my PhD at UNC Greensboro, working with Paul Sylvia, and as I was wrapping up my 5th year, we applied for a grant together to the Templeton Foundation. And it's just a good time for that to be happening as I was finishing up. They're doing this Imagination Institute, like 5-year center, and they were looking for different ways for measuring imagination. And so we put in a letter of interest for that. The proposal worked, and Paul was generous enough to put me as a co-PI on the proposal, which is possible with foundation grants. It's not always possible with government agencies. They have different requirements for postdoc serving as PIs. And so I was able to kind of stay on there actually after I defended, stayed on for a year, did a lot of scanning related to this project. And what it allowed me to do is to kind of pay my own salary to do that work. And then to kind of start a postdoc outside of the lab where I was paying my own salary still out of the grant. It was a 2-year grant. So that kind of got my foot in the door at my first lab that I was able to work at outside of the university. I was with Dan Schachter at Harvard. And from there, I stayed around for a year and worked on for 2 years there, and then transitioned into faculty job. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell, although not quite related to the question that I asked. Now I'm asking myself, I guess, but why might I decide to focus on creativity research or branch out? So in my case, I wanted to kind of get more experience in cognitive psychology and neuroscience, because actually that was not my main background. I was working with Paul Sylvia, who you might know is not a neuroscientist, actually, he's a social psychologist. And so getting extra training in a lab that clearly focuses on cognitive neuroscience in the Shachter lab space was of memory, that helped me to build out my knowledge of psychology and neuroscience of memory, and then to work on that and apply it to creativity. And so I was able to kind of supplement the training in this field of cognitive neuroscience, but then also kind of in parallel combine it with the creativity research that I was doing. Okay, so that's that. And anything else anyone wants to share on this? I think we run around the horn. I don't know, Sergio, you were in the postdoc for a while.
Yeah, right? I have some postdocs, and I don't know if I have to give some tips or postdocs. I don't know if I'm the best person, but I can share my experience at least. As I said, I had a PhD in educational, in environmental psychology. I studied the development of emotions in 3 and 5 months old babies. This was my expertise, but my interest was different, was in the process. So in ontogeny, in the development, so the psychological processes in general. So I try to follow my interests more than my expertise, and developing expertise in different topics, in different labs, or in different environments. So I take my first postdoc in University of Bologna on emotional intelligence, on the development, on the process of development of emotional intelligence. Then another postdoc in another university, University of Padua, again in the emotional side of the developmental side of emotions. And then I started a postdoc on creativity because I was interested in applying my knowledge in this new topic, which was a sort of challenge for me, is can I apply my previous knowledge in this new environment? So I follow, more or less, I try to follow my interest, always my interest, and then I find my correct interest, which is creativity at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that reminds me of something else, which is like I think because creativity is kind of gaining more mainstream popularity and more people are working on it, you can kind of look for those labs that are maybe that haven't done creativity research yet, or it's new for them, and they want to work with someone who really knows the field, right? So that's an entry point for people, because oftentimes you have a developmental psychologist that that got a grant to study creativity in early education or something like that, and they're a developmental psychologist, and they maybe know a little bit about creativity, but not really that much. Again, like going back to our conversation earlier, to really know that much about the measurement and the different theories, and so that's a good way to look for positions too, is to kind of lean into your experience as a creativity researcher. It allows you to keep that going, and then kind of supplement your training in parallel in whatever lab you're going into.
Yeah.
Okay, any other postdoc stories to share? Doesn't have to be around.
I think probably last off, like one of the best things you can do is just network your butt off. So there's a lot of great creativity conferences happening now, right? There's APA Div 10, there's SFNC, there's MIC, like infinite creativity conferences you can go to. And I think when I was looking for a postdoc position, I think I talked with literally everyone in SFNC who was recruiting. last cycle, just to kind of figure out what was going on. And we had a lot of great conversations about like what's exciting and happening in the field and what the future of creativity research should look like, which was awesome. And, you know, I ultimately found this position with Anjan through some really great collaborators who are important and have my back. So I think building up those connections within the community and outside of the community, just talk to everybody, and put yourself out there. That's probably the best thing you can do.
Yeah, 100% agree. Go to all the creativity conferences, as many as you can. Obviously, there are many. SFNC first, obviously, and then the others. But then and other conferences as well. So again, going back to this like creativity, research for identity, but then also like whatever your other kind of foot is in the door of cognitive neuroscience or social psychology or whatever. I mean, I think most people are already basically doing this a lot of times. They're going to conferences that are specific to creativity and to other more mainstream stream fields. Okay, so I think that brings us to our Q&A. So for the audience, actually, I've been queuing this whole time, I think. So for anyone else, I've seen a lot of activity in the chat. I think it's great. Everyone's like introducing themselves and saying a bit about their background and interest and stuff, which is awesome. If anyone has any questions, feel free to please, add them in the chat, and I'll go around and ask them to our panel. Okay, so I'm seeing one right now, and forgive me if I've missed any earlier ones. I'm kind of starting at the bottom. I did scroll up, but I didn't see too many other ones here. So, so what advice would you give to trainees or early career researchers who are apprehensive about the prospects of pursuing an academic career, especially a tenure track faculty position? Anyone? Any thoughts on that? So tenure track academic positions comes with its own considerations, and if there's any thoughts people have on this?
I can start, but I see that Nadine, you were called out in this question, so I think your answer will be especially important. But something my advisor Jim Stigler told me, which just helped so much, and I don't know why I didn't think about this, but I was freaking out at the end of my 5 years at UCLA, because I'm like, industry, academia, postdocs, oh my God, like I can't control any of this, and it's a very chaotic, stressful time. And he was just like, Stace, look, you just do the best you can. You try a few things, and if you like it, you stick with it. And if it doesn't work out, you just do something else. And I just needed someone to tell me, like, it's fine, it's okay. Again, I got super lucky with this position. They were looking for someone from my background, and it just worked out. And that's such a frustrating answer to give someone, like, I got lucky. But I think, again, developing valuable sets of skills, like being able to analyze data well, can serve you in so many different positions and communication and the things I talked about. So I think developing a core set of skills and just being open and realizing like you can do your really good work, you can change lives in academia, in industry, et cetera, and that it's more fluid than ever. So I don't know if that's helpful, but Nadine, I'm going to toss it to you because you were called out in that question.
Sure.
Yes.
Thanks, Stacy and Roger. So what led to your decision to pursue a career in industry? I think, when I was an undergrad, I started doing research when I was a sophomore in college, and I loved research. I knew it was what I wanted to do and make a career out of. So a PhD was always on my mind. I thought I wanted to go clinical psychology because of that practical application piece I would get from everything I was learning and understanding about the world and in psychology research. But I took those 2 years to work full time at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and I got a really lucky opportunity to work on a grant for the Bottin Foundation, which was all about setting up trainings to build emotion skills and creativity skills in people of the Santander, Spain area. And it was going there with Jessica Hoffman, and Zorana was the PI on the project, if you guys know Zorana. And she we went to Spain and we delivered these train the trainer model workshops essentially to teach them, hey, here's a training that will build these skills. And it was the first time I ever got to put research into practice. And I said, that's what I want to do for sure. But I don't want to go clinical. I want to go into IO psychology to do this. And so it was always like, you know, before grad school, the plan was to always practice, but still never lose sight of research. That was the thing that got it all started for me. And I also really like to teach and mentor. So it was always my goal to do those things. And then I will say I'm very lucky being at Hogan Assessments as an industry person, because it very much feels like I'm working with a bunch of PhDs who love to do research, practice as good of science as you can, like in the industry space. And we love to do research projects that do the same thing that y'all are doing in academia as far as like advanced statistical methods, because we sit on mountains of data that we can analyze and then turn into tangible insights for the clients we work with. And so I'm very privileged being where I'm at, but it was definitely always, again, maybe there's something to this linear focus I have, but I saw a path forward working at Hogan, being able to practice, being able to mentor. I teach on the side and I teach one another with the things that I've learned, and I get to do research the whole time. So it's very exciting.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Nadine. Does anyone else want to weigh in on kind of their academic path and how they felt about pursuing academia?
Oh, if I may,
Sure.
I can understand this anxious situation to have a tenure track in academia, because it's common. But again, I really believe that this is the right moment for a creativity researcher to be able to attract interest from academia and from the outside world, also from the industrial world. Because if I remember, in Italy, there is a strange situation. To be able to enter in academia, you should be embedded within a scientific area. So you should apply to the ministry and saying, in which scientific area am I? They assign you a scientific area, and then you can apply for positions. When I first, and we have 4 different areas. The first is clinical, the second is social, then is cognitive psychology, and there is statistics. And when I applied, the first time I applied for all 4 areas, and they just say that creativity is outside of any area of psychology. This was 6 years ago. Then I applied 3 years ago, and they assigned at cognitive psychology. So, for example, in Italy, we have a scientific area for creativity. And from then, so creativity is within the research agenda, also in academia. But if I have to point on another skill to develop, is to be open to change your path, in a sense, not only in academia, so develop your communication skills. Because during your career, from PhD, postdoc, you are developing skills, and you should develop also the skill to communicate real research and creativity to the general audience. This could help you to be attractive also for the outside world, also from the industry world, also to work in other entities, public entities. And because now they are quite all interested in creativity. There is this big hype.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sergio, and that kind of speaks to kind of general science communication abilities. That's going to be relevant for getting, talking about your work to different audiences, or that could also be, really a job talk if you have a faculty interview, to be able to kind of talk about your work at a level that's going to be accessible to people from various types of backgrounds and expertises. And actually, I want to, before, to make sure that everyone sees in the chat, I think Kristen raised a really important point, which is with postdocs, there's not always just like you're applying for a position, right? We talked about like grants will come up here and there, but that's not always the case. There's also like you can email faculty members, PIs, and say, hey, you know, like I'm working on this. You know, I just wanted to see if you know we maybe have some common interests, or you know, if you might have any positions, or if you may be interested in like writing a grant together or something. There's different ways, and this goes to Hannah's points about networking too. It's not always just like finding job on LinkedIn, applying for job, and then like getting job, hopefully. There's ways of kind of talking to people that may have something coming up that's not advertised yet. It doesn't hurt to ask, like you don't necessarily need to write like a super detailed email. You can kind of just like briefly send the note out to someone and just check in and see if they might be interested in working together.
And if I could add to that,
good.
Roger, like
Yeah.
sometimes if you go to a conference somewhere else, maybe there's a local university that has a lab you're interested in, you could say, hey, I'm in town, like I got some really cool data. Do you guys have a spot open in your lab meeting? I could come by and you could like help me think about things, and then you can kind of test out the waters. They know who you are. And I don't know about y'all, but like we're always looking for like really interesting people to come talk to us at our campus. So it's usually like well received. So that's also another thing you could do.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think and that's becomes, you know, an opportunity for you to network with those people, but then also a CV line to say that you have a talk somewhere, right? So it's kind of like you can check a couple boxes with that one. Let me try and see if there's anything in the chat that I'm missing. So here's one. Hannah, at the beginning, you mentioned that you work to make your research accessible to people who are not in academia. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So and this goes to the other question as well about wavering in your desire to be an academic. I know I went to Roger at the beginning of, like very early in grad school after the pandemic started and we went remote. I said, I don't know if I can do the tenure track thing. So I started, you know, Roger was super supportive, and I went out and I started looking for ways to build my network outside of academia, and went to a couple of nonprofit groups. So there was the Sonophilia Foundation, which was a European group. I've since started networking with a couple of other groups of people who are interested in bringing creativity research to the policy sphere. So in terms of like lawmaking and creativity in the arts impacts on health and well-being in the workplace, as well as like corporate interests, people who would like to measure creativity in a workplace setting for like larger companies. And so a lot of what I've learned to do, and I think that this has bolstered my academic work as well, is translate what we're doing as a field for people who can actually use it and want to use it. So like, how do you explain what we're doing to a teacher or someone who, you know, writes up these executive briefs that might get delivered to lawmakers? You know, I know we spend a lot of time doing research because we love doing research, but somewhere down the line, a lot of people want to know, how is this going to affect them? How can they take the work we're doing and use it? So in the back of your mind, I think having that as an end goal of your work, saying, how can we translate this network science finding or something we found in the brain, say down the road, how can we implement this in practice? And I think there's a lot of exciting things going on with intervention work and creativity. There's a lot of people sort of working towards this, but I think always having in the back of your mind, how would I explain this to my third grade teacher? How would I explain this to my grandma? I think that's a really valuable thing that we should be doing more as a field. It's something that I try to do always or often. So yeah, that's something that I'm pretty passionate about.
Great point, Hannah. So we have one more question here on grants, and then I want to get to our kind of wrapping up section. So we have a question about, based on your experience, how difficult is it to find funding to pursue an academic path in the creativity field? How can a project that aims to study creativity be competitive for a grant when competing with other topics from more established fields like memory, attention, and so forth? And they're saying, I imagine it varies by country. So, I mean, I can say from my side, I have been, when I first, so I mentioned earlier about the Templeton Foundation. That was the first grant that I was, that I have applied for and was lucky to receive. And they're already kind of interested in creativity as you know, kind of by default. And so it wasn't really a hard sell to kind of, to explain why it's important. And there was actually an open call for it, and it was specifically about creativity and imagination. So Templeton's a good organization to keep an eye on. I would also say that the National Science Foundation has been very supportive of creativity research in our lab and others. Greg Solomon, for those of you who were at the last SFNC meeting, is a program officer at the STEM division of NSF, and actually just traveled to SFNC to talk about NSF and like applying for funding. And it was super encouraging people to think about how their work could be relevant to, you know, STEM education, for example. And, you know, as people are always, you know, talking about how creativity is important for education, there's more and more creativity happening in education. You know, that is very ripe for pursuing if that's something that you feel fits well with your work. And maybe it's not obvious at first. I mean, for me, like, I don't have an education background. But I kind of realized going into it that, or soon after going into it, and I was working with Adam Green, who you know, has more experience in this area early on when I was applying to NSF, that you can kind of make your work relevant to these agencies, and that goes for other agencies too, like NIH and others, because we're working with a construct that touches so many different other constructs and other kind of areas of life with real world consequences. You know, with respect to education, there's kind of measurement that you can focus on. You don't necessarily have to have an intervention in mind. That's, you know, I applied for grants to the Division of Research on Learning. You can do basic research on learning that has like a creativity related focus to it. You know, and for those who don't know, like one of the main things that program officers do in grants is to kind of respond to emails from people that are asking them about their ideas and they think it's a good fit for the division and that they're running. So don't feel shy about reaching out to say you have an idea for something, and you know, maybe they won't answer every time. I've gotten ghosted on plenty of emails myself. It doesn't hurt to just like put your idea out there and see if it's a good fit before you put all the effort into like writing the grant. So kind of a long-winded way of saying that I think the NSF is worth definitely keeping an eye on, specifically in the STEM education area. Does anyone else have anything to say on the grant side?
Maybe I read again the question is, we have to compete with other topics in established fields. Okay, two points on this. This is right. We have to compete with memory, attention, and so on. But from our side, we have the lucky that we have creativity is still an unexplored land. So we have a lot of interesting research questions to pose, still to pose. So these are big questions, and we can apply on big questions. And this is the first point, that in other established field is not so, not similar. The other point is that we have not always to compete. We can create research proposals or grant proposal in collaboration with all of this. So the creative cognition approach helps us to create communities of research on working on big questions. For example, how emotions, attentions, and so on interacts. And indeed, there is interest in this. For example, the Bial Foundation, which is this Portuguese foundation funding physiological research, this year open the topic on creativity. So they are interested not only in emotion, but also in creativity. It are not big grants, but is a sign of the time frame we are living in. And again, we have not, for example, in Europe, big grants. For example, European grants. The last course for creativity and as a basic research was from 10 years ago, maybe the last big grants. Now, creativity in European Commission is always related to creative industries, which is different from creativity research. But again, we can find as psychologists opportunities to collaborate with creative industries and applying grants with them. And in this case, exploring some basic questions in these big grants.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sergio. And also going back to the question, as you were saying about the competition part of it, if you're already studying one of those competing constructs in a way, if you already happen to be someone who studies creativity and memory or attention and something else, you can decide like what's the best framing of your work to maybe put that one construct ahead in like the framing of your work and say that will also be relevant for creativity, or being able to study creativity and attention allows understanding the fundamental mechanisms of how attention works, if that's like the primary interest of the funding agency. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. I want to have one more kind of lightning round here for all our panelists to weigh in on. So one piece of advice you wish you'd gotten as a student. Anyone want to jump in?
I guess I'll go. I kind of said it earlier. You're going to be okay. You got hard skills. You know how to work hard. You can make an impact in many different ways. And professors are excited to work with industry. I think industry is excited to work for professors. You might feel this dichotomy, but I think it's starting to break down. So I just want to encourage everybody to do your best, do good, open, honest science. And, you know, you can't control everything, and that's just part of the process. So I'm just wishing you all luck and good mental health, I guess.
Thank you, Stacey.
I'll echo a similar sentiment. Honestly, if I could say something back to myself, it's just be kind to yourself and to one another. It's a very high pressured environment and stressful, and you just always want to do the best you can. And sometimes you don't feel your best is good enough, but I'm telling you, grad school is the time to make mistakes, and then more importantly, learn from those mistakes. So you don't have to have it all figured out, but remember to be kind to one another and yourself.
Yes, great point. Hannah, any final thoughts?
Oh, things I would have told myself, or I would just yeah, I think sort of echo to be kind to yourself. We do a lot of work, and even in the academic sphere, you know, work-life balance is constantly an issue, and I think being understanding and that time for rest is also time to prepare yourself for more of this great work. So, you know, enjoy your life.
Amen. Sergio.
Thank you for all these suggestions. I will use it still. I will use it. I don't know. Maybe a suggestion or an advice is you cannot know everything alone. Start collaborating. You can know almost everything in a network. So as a network, so start collaborating. And we have this pressure of being on the top of the literature, knowing everything. You cannot know everything, but you can collaborate and asking others to help you with this.
Yes, these are all excellent points. Thank you to everyone for for coming today. Thank you to our panelists. This has really been an enlightening conversation. I hope it was useful for everyone out there. Please make sure to come back and join us at 2 o'clock for our crosstalk on humor. And that's all for us. So thanks, everyone. Take care. See you in a bit.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.